confused, everyone.
Let's get dangerous.
This is so cool.
I know.
It feels so right.
Speak, Ciely.
I'm sorry, who is this?
Nice try, Moonman. Pretending not to know. Earth's greatest mastermind.
You just made the list.
I thought you said that was a myth.
Just because it's a myth doesn't mean it's not true.
If you all blindly follow my plan, we may have a chance.
Sure, we talk about it all the time.
Really?
No. Burn.
Game on, you ducks. Did you survive week 5? And I say survive with intent. Hopefully, if you're in Survivor Pool, you avoided the Rams and the Cardinals. Week 5 decimation seems to take its chance every single year. Like week 5, I gotta tell you guys, week 5 is always the week where it sounds weird, but I'm going as much guarantees can guarantee. The Lions in one, and I guess the Colts really weren't, but I did take Lions and Colts. It just feels like week 5. Maybe that's just PTSD from going all the way back to years and years and years and years and years ago when the Giants lost to the Seahawks in week 5, despite the fact that the Giants were one of the best teams in the league and the Seahawks were garbage. And I'm pretty sure it was almost a double-digit favorite for the Giants. Anyway, week 5, heads up. If you learned it this year, haven't seen it in the past, week 5 is definitely the biggest trip up. But that's what we're talking about too, is fantasy week 5. And hopefully you didn't get tripped up with some more injuries. We'll just talk about the big one off the top. Omarion Hampton in a walking boot after the game. Sounds like it might have been precautionary. It was in a walking boot with no crutches. Even so, let's assume he's out for a week or two. The answer here being is that I'm not going crazy for Hassan Haskins or Kamani Vidal. I know there's some Vidal fans out there. I think Haskins fits a little bit better. He has the familiarity with Harbaugh going back to college. And I think even profiling the two running backs that Haskins would be the option near the goal line. So similar to Michael Carter with Demercado, which we're going to talk about, is I would lean towards Haskins in a Carter type of situation. I don't think the split will be as pronounced. And again, hopefully Hampton's not out for that long. If it wasn't for the fact that they were facing the Dolphins this week, I probably wouldn't even care much, and you'll see that in the waiver column. And speaking of Michael Carter, even with that split being what we all thought it might be, I don't think anybody, at least me, maybe everybody else is smarter than me, expected it to be that big of a split. Thank you also, Demercado, for making it even worse by continuing the theme of NFL players that are dumb as and throw the ball down at the goal line, because that's not even a celebration. It's not even like... I'd rather them do the gritty at the one, get gobsmacked and fumbled by a defender than to just throw the ball on the ground. How are we still doing this? How is this even a thing? How isn't the first person in the NFL to do this and all the other players are like, we're not going to look that stupid. We're better than you. Nope, we're just going to keep doing it is the answer. And the answer is Michael Carter. Some tougher matchups going forward, and maybe some, like with Green Bay in 2 weeks, you could see more Demercado, although they did use Bam Knight, but not in the pass-catching role as much as Demercado was. All that being said, it's Michael Carter. He's still fringe RB2. If everybody was healthy and all teams were playing, he'd probably be an RB3, but we're still waiting through some buys and other injuries, so there you go. Let's talk about some other usage. Dylan Gabriel is at quarterback. I don't know why I paused on Dylan Gabriel like that. Dylan Gabriel is the quarterback for the Browns, and as you saw in that first start, David Njoku is back. They continue to use a lot of 2 tight end sets, and there was a lot of comfort with Gabriel and Njoku. So if you're looking for a tight end, if you happen to drop him, you can go back to David Njoku. And Isaiah Bond was second in targets, despite being third in routes, only behind Njoku and Jerry Jeudy. And there does seem to be some connection where Gabriel is looking for him. Hopefully he starts looking for him a little bit more open and throwing him a little bit more open. But I think Isaiah Bond's really interesting there. Let's talk another positive running back situation. And Jacory Croskey-Merritt is happening. Finally gets to start. Still split in the backfield some. I know you guys saw McNichols, but took more from Chris Rodriguez, that being Croskey-Merritt. So possibly pushing into the RB2 conversation. Put it this way, if the matchups were equal between Carter and Croskey-Merritt, I think it would be a toss-up, even with the fewer snaps for Croskey-Merritt because of the better talent. If the matchups are going one way or the other, that might skew things, and I would put Croskey-Merritt in front of anybody, obviously, from the Chargers backfield with no Hampton. Just to kind of give you an idea there. Another running back, and this one dominating Dowdle, and putting a Dowdle into your mind. That was bad. For next week, when Chuba Hubbard comes back, Chuba Hubbard, he's not losing the lead role, But similar to other backfields, this could this could be a 50-50 split when he comes back. I mean, you cannot ignore what Dowdle did in that game. And Hubbard was kind of only okay this year, kind of volume reliant. It wasn't the Hubbard we saw for most of the first half of last year. Actually, probably the first 2/3 of last year before he started to slow down. So Dowdle eating in would be enough of a concern. That being said, if you're desperate, 1-4, 0-5, you could take the flyer on Dowdle or Chuba Hubbard in a trade, because I think the Chuba Hubbard manager is probably panicking right about now. So there's an opportunity there. If he comes back and it's like, hey, you know what? Maybe Hubbard just wasn't 100%, and now Hubbard gets 80% of the workload again, and forget about it. That was fun from Dowdle, but it was just a one-game thing. I don't think that's the case, but you see where I'm going, kind of creating this opportunity for you. Speaking of split backfields, Chubb and Marks, almost evenly 50-50. Of course, if we knew that, we'd still rank Marks and his upside, especially in the passing game, over Nick Chubb. Just happened to be a game where Nick Chubb did a little bit more on the ground with his carries and had the touchdown. So Marks still over Chubb, but not, as we talked about last week, Marks is not inside the top 20 conversation yet. It's going to be a 50-50 split, somewhat just like it's the better version. That's maybe crazy to say, but it's the slightly better version than the Chargers without Hampton, projected-wise. Some use that we saw change or not be what we expected. Malik Washington was worth the flyer to take on replacing Tyreek Hill, but as I mentioned in waivers, there was a non-zero chance that he stayed in his role, and Westbrook-Akina stepped into the number 2, and that's what happened. So Malik Washington, 1 week flyer, you can drop him if you got him. Obviously, it depends on who's out there on waivers, and he will have a good game, 2 or 3. It's just you're not going to know when it's going to happen because he's running as the number 3. And of course, Darren Waller, screw it, just going to be pushing the top 5 rankings the rest of the season at tight end, because not only is he back, not only is he a top 2 option with no Tyreek Hill, it's basically Jalen Waddle and Waller. He just looks good. This is nuts. Like, can we do this for more players? Just go away for a couple years, come back and look amazing? So anyway, moving on to the Raiders, Jack Besh got on the field more than Thornton this week, which was interesting to see and something to watch in deeper leagues in case that Jacoby Myers gets traded or an injury even there. Besh was somebody that we thought talent-wise could push for a top 3 spot from opening day. Didn't happen, but that's worth noting. Big game from Ryan Flournoy and not Jalen Tolbert, which was super disappointing. And I'm not counting on this too much going forward, obviously, mostly because a matchup type situation with Sauce Gardner on George Pickens, not going to face that every single week to open up the others. Jake Ferguson is still going to be the number 2. Pickens and Ferguson are the 1 and the 2. And of course, Devontae Turpin was out for this game. Not that I think Turpin's a huge threat, but we already saw before that Tolbert and Turpin, like they were going to mix and mash, and that a lot of positive talk was about Turpin overtaking Tolbert. And yes, Tolbert ended up being a big fail on a flyer as a wide receiver 3 this week. I admittedly had him inside my top 40, thinking that with no Turpin, that he was going to be the guy because of Sauce Gardner on Pickens. Instead, it was Flournoy. And yes, there should be some appeal with how much that Dak Prescott is throwing, and especially if they face other opportunities to throw a ton throughout the game. But the Cowboys, this upcoming week, I don't know that I would expect it against Carolina as much. So, Hail Mary kind of play, but I wouldn't go overreacting to the 100-yard game from Flournoy, even though it's a great story for him on top of things, coming from JUCO and everything. So, going back to other playing backfields. Oh, and before we move on, Jaydon Blue. There was not an uptick there. So you can kind of cast him aside. Not only did it take Miles Sanders being out for them to activate Blue, but I don't even call that active, really. He barely saw any of the field. And then speaking of running backs, which is just going to make us bang our heads against the wall, Sean Payton strikes again. Tyler Batty back to being batty for that backfield in the mix, as in he hurt R.J. Harvey because he was out there and as the pass-catching option more than Harvey, and that's just what we're going to do. And until next year, or until J.K. Dobbins gets hurt, R.J. Harvey, everybody, just like Trevion Henderson, and just disappointments, and got to keep him on your bench, or maybe trade to somebody who's thinking, hey, I'm going to take the flyer. Not much for you to do otherwise. Interesting, though, to see Pat Bryant getting more in the mix for the Broncos. But again, as Sean Payton, could have been a one-week thing. He could be coming for the number 3 role. But I wouldn't overreact unless, hey, if you're a 14-team league and you need flyers, Pat Bryant with the uptick. But again, it's Sean Payton. He loves to do this to us. Wide receiver situation also in the Carolina Panthers wide receiver room. Xavier Legette is back. and had a good game. Great catch. Jalen Coker is coming back, but the problem here is that we're thinking that Coker could overtake the number 2 role outside because of Legette's struggles and his injury. If Legette's going to be back to somewhat relevant, Coker could slide back into the number 3, which makes both of them frustrating, and all we care about is Tedero and McMillan. But that's something to worth monitor. I would still stash Coker. I would still pick up Legette and stash him on your bench until this is completely clear. If you don't want to deal with that and you have a slim bench and you want more upside with other flyers, I have no problem with that. A few more before we get out of here. The Giants also went tight end heavy with no Malik Neighbors, a lot of 2 tight end sets. Daniel Bellinger in the mix early and kind of frustrating those that took the flyer on Theo Johnson. But good news, 2 touchdowns for him, and Darius Slayton possibly hurt, which means Theo Johnson just continuing to probably be a number 2 on that team going forward. And Wan'Dale Robinson, or even if Slayton's healthy, Theo Johnson's going to be a big option, just like Mason Taylor for the Jets. Both of them looking at least the number 3s for their team, if not 2s. And speaking of the Jets, that is the Justin Fields roller coaster in a nutshell, is that game. Like 90% of that game, you're like, well, here's the Justin Fields 5-point game that I hate that I get, that I have to roll through. And then, oh, by the way, the last 10% of the game, amazing. Justin Fields, top 5 quarterback for the week, going ballistic. Garrett Wilson saves his day, touchdown. This is Justin Fields in a nutshell. Help, this is me in a nutshell. So if you don't want to deal with that, because the game could have ended a few minutes earlier and then everybody would have been hating starting Justin Fields, that's what you have to live with. That's pretty much what I've been saying for the entire year. And before we get out of here, Tyjae Spears is back. As I said, it just kind of kills Tony Pollard into that RB3 conversation because he wasn't even an RB2 with all the volume. And now Spears is going to start eating in even more as he gets healthier. Calvin Ridley finally had a day. Yay, he's a wide receiver 4 because somebody has to take a back seat between Calvin Ridley or Alec Ayomanor, and Ayomanor was the one that took the back seat as Ridley had a good game. So it's most likely never going to be both until Cam Ward severely improves. So boo for Ayomanor, yay question mark for Ridley, but understanding that both are wide receiver 4s going forward. Hopefully, like I said, you survived your survivor and the injuries and the madness of week 5 and enjoy Monday Night Football. Back for the long form with another great guest on Wednesday. Toodles and goodbye, whatever the hell that means.